oh, we're going to a marriage retreat. It just felt creepy. And instantly I was like, I wanted to go to this retreat, but now it just feels like a good old boys club. And snickering part had to do when they were mentioning sex. So it was just very subtle and probably acceptable back in the day, but it stayed with me that this is a feeling about sex, especially in the church, that makes me uncomfortable. Welcome back to the Sexual Wholeness Revival podcast. We are so glad that you joined us today. And guess what? We're going to be talking about sex. Yes, it happens almost every time, but this time we have a very specific emphasis, and there's some questions that I am guessing maybe you've never asked or answered. So stay with us. It's absolutely going to be a game changer. And I'm reminded of years ago being at church and hearing a marriage retreat being announced. And nowadays I'm like, oh, that's awesome. But back then there was this feeling of Snickers among the men, and not the candy bar type. No, this was the wink, oh, we're going to a marriage retreat. It just felt creepy. And instantly I was like, I wanted to go to this retreat, but now it just feels like a good old boys club. And snickering part had to do when they were mentioning sex. So it was just very subtle and probably acceptable back in the day, but it stayed with me that this is a feeling about sex, especially in the church, that makes me uncomfortable. And I'm guessing that a lot of our listeners have been in situations where there have been negative things about sex. And maybe it's in a setting that should be positive. It's really difficult to kind of separate those ideas. What's good? What's bad, or what's helpful, what's not. And so we are going to try to get some clarity on that today. And I want to start with a big question that is, why is it hard to experience sex as something that is good?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it is a big question. In our lifetime, there can be several different influences into our life that we are filtering sex and how we think of sex through. So I'm curious, what are some common obstacles that portray sex in a bad way?
I'm definitely going to read this list. And the reason I'm going to be particular about this is to help our audience. Maybe they will see themselves in one of these negative obstacles around sex. So they're going, oh, I'm not the only one. Unfortunately, there are more than what we're even going to cover today. But here is the list. Nobody modeled healthy intimacy. Didn't see it at home, didn't see it in your extended family, just wasn't really something that you saw in your culture. Number 2, church talked about sexual sin, but not sexual wholeness. All of the big finger waving at you, what is wrong, what is bad, what is harmful, but left out all of the reasons for yes and God's goodness. Number 3, purity culture left shame. Now, I know we've had an entire episode on purity culture and some of that mindset, but it is unfortunately still affecting individuals and marriages. Number 4, and this is about abuse, that it absolutely crushes your dignity, your identity. And if that has happened, it would be almost impossible to conceive of sex as being something good.
Right.
Number 5, porn distorts your understanding. And this is whether you have participated in porn or your spouse or in any other relationship. If there's been just a sprinkling of porn, it's quite possible that it has slanted things. And being able to see sex as good is just off the charts there. Number 6, sex became obligation or performance. Now, there's so many reasons that this might happen, and some of it might be messages from the church. Oh, ladies, you got to keep your man happy or else he's going to look elsewhere. I can't even believe that is a message, but it certainly has been in the past. Sometimes it's just hinted at, it's innuendo, but none of that is good or from God, or even if there's been misunderstandings about expectations. I expected her to want sex as much as I did. So right from the get-go, there's no way that you can see sex as good if that's been the message. This is number 7, physical pleasure for the men was emphasized without an understanding of emotional and spiritual connection, which of course that makes it be all about the body, what's happening in the body. And pleasure is good and pleasure is from God, but there's more to the message than that alone.
Yeah, that's quite a list. And I think when you mentioned church talked about sexual sin, but not sexual wholeness, I think that is such an issue when you look at the rest of the list too. Some of these things are going unaddressed because the church has not done its part to continue the conversation into sexual wholeness. And so it's really important that we actively remove stigma and address the shame in our lives so that we can have these conversations as believers. A lot of these things happen in our childhood as well that we think into adulthood, we just push through. I'm an adult now, but they will still show up as an adult. So how do these beliefs show up? I'm an adult now. I had my childhood, but I'm an adult. I should get a say, but they still show up. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it can be very subtle because this way of thinking has been your normal way of thinking. And you may not realize how it influenced you and how it limited you. And shame is number 1 because shame is so harmful. And anything that makes you feel like you are bad, that is not what God is saying to you. If it's saying that sex is bad, we know outside of marriage that it doesn't have God's blessing. It's out of His design. But shame can come in there and just rob our joy and rob our freedom. So it looks different on different people, I think. And I know, Katieann, that talking about shame is something that you have had a lot of experience. Anything that brings to mind right there for you?
Yes, I've had a lot of shame. Thank you. To me, shame is really understanding and having the courage to look at where you are still operating in shame. You have to be willing to look at those things you've been trying to bury from your past. And that can get really tricky and really hard for people who are believers because it feels like we're somehow maybe failing in our Christian walk. Jesus healed me. He set me free. Yes. Also, we need to look at why this thing you've tried to bury keeps showing up and the fruit of it keeps appearing in your life. Why does that still have shame over you? And I encourage and try to help people to understand that in addressing shame by going back and understanding why this narrative keeps showing up, this name keeps showing up. It's not because you're going to stay there. It's so that you can heal and move beyond that. And so shame, whether you're trying to power through it, I am beautifully and wonderfully made. Yes. Deep down in your core, you don't believe that though. You believe it here. You're a good girl here, back down here. your heart is struggling to believe that, and trying to help people navigate that. It's not to stay and be a victim, but it's so that you can heal, grow, and show up authentically in the present and build for the future you were created for. And so understanding shame and its impact is super important.
It is, and it's not addressed enough, but I really like how you described it there. Something else that might show up as an adult is avoidance. Now, some people specifically are avoiding sex even in marriage. And this has happened. I've worked with couples. It could be the husband as much as it could be the wife, or it could be that different stages in their marriage, one or the other has avoided sex. A lot of times they don't know why initially. They just know it's uncomfortable, it's potentially painful emotionally. Now, hey, if sex is painful physically, then I could understand avoiding it, but being able to talk it out is going to make such a difference. Avoidance can happen when embarrassed about some of your requests and you don't have the safety to speak up. There's a lot of ways that avoidance can happen. So I'm going to move on, though. Another way would be duty sex. And I've heard this more from wives who are, I just got to keep the peace. I've just got to do what he wants me to do, and it'll be okay, and this is what it is. And unfortunately, that works against you as I'll just say, the wife who chooses that, because you have not stood up for your own body and your heart, and you betrayed even yourself by participating in something that was not where you were. It's also deception and even a type of betrayal with your spouse. So duty sex is not solving a problem, it is adding an additional problem. Another one would be performance pressure, and we mentioned this earlier, but if there has been pornography, and I've heard wives say, oh, I know he watched pornography, and I think I've got to do more things that I'm comfortable doing because that's what he's used to, then that is the wrong standard or the wrong measurement. It also is not authentic. If you are pretending to be something during sex, if you are altering your place of peace and pushing yourself for activity that is not what you choose, then that will work against you. And you can't sustain it. In any of these places, what they will lead to is a deep place of resentment and bitterness. And then that causes more distance. So unfortunately, this is like the snowball effect of one of these negative things causing more. I have emotional disconnect there, which is so common. I think more couples experience disconnection over connection, and they get used to it. And they think, oh, we're not fighting, so we must be okay. But that is showing you've entered roommate phase, and you may be good co-parents, and I'm thankful for that, but you're missing out on so much. And two more here, that place of emptiness. Wow. When you've had dreams for sex to be, in marriage, to be fulfilling, to create more closeness, to be just that sweet place that happens no place else. That is so sad, and that emptiness just carries over into every area of your marriage and then your life. It begins to drain you. I know when couples are struggling with sex and their marriage, that they are not able to really live into their purpose because this thing is draining them. It's weighing them down. And then the last one here is low self-esteem. When these negative things are happening, when these ways of thinking are guiding you, then you aren't experiencing freedom to express yourself. And that certainly begins to affect your self-esteem.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too, because all of the things that you've listed, I think, can also, it might not just be one thing. It might
Yeah.
be shame and low self-esteem that leads to fear and pressure. And when you're looking at this list, when you're thinking about this list and asking yourself the question, what applies to me? It's okay, because these are all really based in disconnection and shame. I say it's okay to have more than one, in the sense that it doesn't mean that you're worse off than anyone else, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
For me, there was a lot of low self-esteem that I brought into my marriage, which led to shame, and it was shame and fear and the performance pressure that I struggled with in the early years of my marriage, because I had all of these ideas. And the minute I started to actually shed light on what was happening inside of me, it really did have to do much more with me than it did how he was treating me. I could actually receive the love and how well he loves me when I started addressing these things. And I think we go, why do I feel empty? Why do I feel like my needs are going unmet? And then as soon as I started uncovering this tangle of shame, self-hatred, all of those things, all of a sudden healing came. And as the healing came, I thought, good God, this man loves me more than anyone on the planet. And I am actually in a place where I can believe it and receive it. And the first place to start is asking the Lord the questions, what narrative, what lie am I believing? Where is this affecting? Where is this bringing disconnect? Where am I unable to receive the love my spouse has for me, because I'm looking at it through a filter of pain? And so that is a good just encouragement. I just want to encourage people. And so the question is, with that, what are we missing? Sex is physical. No, it's more than that. Tell us more about that, will you, Mary?
Yes, it is definitely more than physical. And some of those things on the list are probably connected with the fact that the emphasis was on the physical. And basically, if you've been on planet Earth, that's been the message, that sex is physical. So it's not on you that you may have missed that there is more to it than that. And thankfully, God has the example. That's why we always say we're going back to God's original design. And my little nutshell on that is that God is three persons, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and He made man as a triune being, and we do have a body, and we are a spirit being, we have a soul. So the oneness that God designed, the good parts of sex in marriage, is that we would connect in all three areas, with our body, with our soul, and with our spirit. So it's quite possible, if some of these other things have been going on, that maybe you were just missing the soul part of the emotional connection, and the spiritual part that is the alignment that God has. So just keep this thought in your mind, that it's not, sexual intimacy is not a physical only event, but a total couple experience. And I want to give some other language to how we can distinguish these areas. So yes, in the body there is pleasure. It's mutual pleasure. This is how you know that both couples have freedom to express themselves, make their preferences known. It is mutual pleasure. There is freedom to explore, to experience, and to enjoy. So none of that would be a duty. None of that would be performance. And we're giving you this information knowing that it's not going to be an instant overnight fix, but these are some things to be looking for that you can incorporate in your soul. Wow, this is so core, that you want to be known and understood. And all of that happens through emotional connection. Now, we have another episode coming up soon about learning emotional connection, but I just want you to see it affects everything. And some people are like, I didn't grow up that way, and my family didn't talk about feelings. And I have a little bit of a smart aleck response to that, and that is, you know what? You didn't know algebra until a teacher taught you, and on occasion you actually use algebra. But maybe you didn't grow up with a family that was emotionally connected. They're skills, and you can still learn them, and it's never too late. So we will always be encouraging you towards that. And in that realm of the oneness experience through the soul, you feel safe, you feel chosen, you feel valued and cherished. That alone, it completely changes the experience. And then I want to talk about that spiritual part of the oneness. God is not embarrassed by sex. As a matter of fact, He designed it, and He gives it His absolute 100% approval. So you are having the opportunity to experience God's blessing in sexual intimacy. You are partnering with God's design. You're coming into alignment. And that may sound like foreign language to you, but I want you to realize that this is a good thing. This is a God thing. Even if you've been in church in the past and you haven't heard it, this is still available to you. And being in God's blessing with sex and marriage means you'll be fruitful. Now, sure, we want you to have kids if that's a part of your plan, but it's more than that. There is a place of overflow that you live in when you are including and inviting the spiritual aspect of oneness in sexual intimacy.
That's so good. Okay, so let's say we have some listeners that are just jumping into this podcast and they're going, this is me. I have that shame. It was never modeled to me. What would you say to them to begin shifting what they used to believe to this new understanding? Like, what are some steps to get started down this healthy path?
Yes, we're always about the steps, aren't we? I know that I always want to encourage people. Whatever you've experienced in the past is one thing, but you're never stuck there. There are always ways to get to a fuller place in all of the goodness of God. So first of all, to recognize some of the lies that you believed. And that's why we spent some time on that earlier in the podcast. So maybe you could identify some of those things. And then to identify the behavior that it caused. So it's not just I thought this way, I also was influenced in some of my actions because of it. And then we want to break agreement with that lie. That is not what I am choosing. I am breaking any partnership with what the enemy was influencing me with. I totally want to choose God and what you have for me. And then we can begin to exchange it for God's truth, because there are opposite things. If we had a message about shame, and that we know is a lie and a part of what the enemy was influencing, there is a different message, a counter message that we can get that is the good from God. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. And once you exchange that, you get to meditate on that truth, because it's not a one and done. You have been thinking this way for years. And spiritually, when you break agreement with that, that is so powerful. But you get to walk out your faith by what you're meditating on. And then you're sharing this process with your spouse. It's quite possible that they have been going through some of these things as well. And it'll be like the moment that brings you closer, because you get real about what has been bothering you.
Yeah. And it can be very scary to think about sharing some of those inner thoughts, feelings, doubts, whatever it may be with your spouse.
Yeah.
But that is how trust is built, is in the exchange of truth.
Amen. Amen.
So sharing it with your spouse, is vital in connection and having that intimacy. Some people don't even know where to start or how to share these types of things with them. How would you encourage them?
It's interesting because we have all been taught something, we've all experienced something, and that's influenced you. And as I've said, it may be what's normal for you, but maybe your spouse has not experienced those exact same things. So starting to talk about what you've experienced is helpful, and realizing that sex being reduced to physical only, that is a common thing that people have struggled with. So give it language, say it out loud. Oh, it's more than just the body? Wow. And then realizing that you missed God's design, the spirit, soul, and body. And going, wow, there is more that we could bring into this, just to begin to build some excitement. So the beliefs that we might want to change, because I said earlier, we're going to swap out some of those beliefs. So if you have thought sex is dirty, you can replace that with sex is God's creation. If you have thought sex is just for men, replace that with sex is for mutual delight. If you've thought sex is dangerous, replace that with sex can be safe. If you've thought sex is just physical, replace that with sex is for the spirit and the soul and the body and this total oneness. That is going to get you started to a great place. I have just a few other questions maybe you want to ask your spouse. What beliefs have you had that caused you problems? How can we help each other to make a shift? And what do we want our sex life to look like? Because you get to design that. It doesn't have to be whatever message you heard from your family, your culture, your church life growing up. You are husband and wife, and you get to design that. And God has more yeses than nos for what he says is wonderful in marriage. And if you're curious, I do have a free ebook I'd love to get to you. It is called God's Gift to Marriage. And we unpack all of these things. It gives some super practical tips on how you can create that marriage and that beautiful sexual intimacy that makes you feel closer to each other.
Excellent. And until next time, let's bring back wholeness.